the story of Cornelius, and we're about to see today, once again, God teaching Peter another lesson. You know, he's had to do that a time or two with Peter in the past, and even though Jesus has gone back up to heaven, we see right here that he's happened to teach Peter something else. So I want y'all to know we can all be saved by grace. Jew, Gentile, man, woman, boy, or girl, we can all be saved through the blood of Christ, through that grace that he has given us. So we're going to look at today starting in verse 19, and we'll go to verse 16 tonight. So Acts chapter 10, starting in verse 9, it says this. The next day, as they went on their journey and drew near the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. Then he became very hungry and wanted to eat. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance and saw heaven opened and an object like a great sheet bound at the four corners, descending to him and let down to the earth. In it were all kinds of four-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, and birds of the air. And a voice came to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything common or unclean." And a voice spoke to him again the second time, "What God has cleansed, you must not call common." This was done 3 times, and the object was taken up into heaven again. So that is Acts chapter 10, verses 9 through 16. And we'll get more of the full picture of that story as we go on. But if you remember from Sunday night in the story, there was a Gentile man by the name of Cornelius who had seen in a vision that Peter would be coming to him and show him things about Jesus, about God. And so you may remember Cornelius, he sends out some of his military men, "Go get this guy, let's go get him." And we also talked about wonder how long it took to get to 32 miles. And I'm glad we had that conversation, and it just goes to show if you continue to read forward, sometimes you get your answer. And we'll see in the next section, it looked like they got there about the next day or so. They hauled some tail. We see here in verse 9, the next day as they went on their journey and drew near the city. So they weren't far away. They covered some ground, I'll tell you that much. They were on a roll. So the very next day, they journey on their way to the city. So the men, they're approaching the city, approaching Simon the tanner's house, because you know that's where Peter was staying. After doing the miracles, healing Aeneas and Lydda, and then being there, bringing Tabitha back to life there in Joppa. And then that's where you remember he stayed with Simon. And so Cornelius, being over in Caesarea, knew he was over there and had that vision. Let me go send my men over there to bring him here, because he's supposed to reveal some things to me about God. So these military men, they're getting there. They're working on it. The next day, on their journey, they drew near the city. They're getting close. And while they were there, they were on their way, Peter not suspecting anything. It says he went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. So about noon, and as we talked about Sunday night, the house is right by the sea. So I can imagine this, almost like a movie scene. It's 12 o'clock noon, perhaps a real nice time of the day. Sees the sun and the beach off in the distance while he's up on top of the house. Just peaceful, and they're praying. Kind of reminds me of when I've gone fishing sometimes. Out there, just on the end of the lake, throwing a casting reel, just quiet, peaceful to yourself. We see Peter here trying to have some alone time with the Lord. Right here about noon on the housetop to pray. And it says in verse 10, it says, "Then he became very hungry and wanted to eat. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance and saw heaven opened and an object like a great sheet bound at the four corners descending to him and let down to the earth." He probably thought he was just going to go up and have a little prayer time. A little more happened than just going up and having a little prayer time. He got hungry. But trying to have a quiet time, I think I've been there. I'm trying to have a quiet time, and I'm getting hungry. I'm ready to eat something. And we see here Peter, he said he was very hungry. He wanted to eat. And I don't blame him. If I was hungry, I'd want to eat too. But it says they were making ready, because remember, he was the guest. So he was the guest at the house, relaxing on top, praying to the Lord, and they're getting the meal ready. They treated their guests pretty well. They were getting the meal ready to go for Peter. And just goes to show how God's timing is perfect. God puts him in this trance, speaks to him when he was hungry. Now, no doubt this perhaps would have got his attention any time, but I find it intriguing. This trance happens, and it's about animals and killing them and eating them. Because he was hungry. He was ready to eat. God knew this would resonate with him at that time. He was hungry, ready to eat. God is always on time. Never early, never late. So about noon, he's praying, hungry, and God shows him a thing or two. Fell into a trance, saw heaven open, and an object like a great sheet bound at the four corners. He said to him and went down to the earth. I can imagine that too. What comes to my mind is like one of those big old picnic blankets. Big old picnic blanket, or like someone that's like traveling and they have it like all tied up together. And I can imagine it. It says here, the sheet bound, four corners. And bada bing, bada boom, and he sees what's in this sheet. So it's cool to imagine. Everything here in this blanket opens up, and what do we see in it? All kinds of four-footed animals of the earth. Wild beasts, creeping things, birds of the air. All different kinds of things. Might have been some chicken in there. That would have made me happy. Might have been a chicken in there. Might have been a few cows. It wouldn't have to be a great sheet, big sheet if you threw a cow in there. I don't know what was in there. Like I said, my imagination. But four-footed animals, wild beasts, creeping things. Might have been some pigs in there. Something that this is where you have to remember the Old Testament. Something that was considered unclean. And that's what Peter's referring to here in verse 14 when he's talking about unclean or common, because you have to have a knowledge of the Old Testament to get what this is talking about. And really, according to Jewish law, certain foods were forbidden to be eaten. You can look at that in Leviticus 11. Eating these creatures made a person unclean, so he or she would be unable to worship God publicly or in the presence of other Jews until he or she performed the rites for becoming ceremonially clean again. The food laws made it difficult for Jews to eat with Gentiles without being defiled. Because remember, the Jews followed these things. The Gentiles did not. And remember, here we have Peter, a Jew, Cornelius, a Gentile. So, God using an Old Testament picture to show a picture to Peter today in the same day and age for us. And we'll get into that picture more. But clearly what we see here is, as I said, God's saving grace is for all people. Not just the Jew, not just the Gentile, not someone that may be viewed under society or less than, but for everyone. And we see here that all kinds of animals were included in this. Just like the same to say, everyone's included, I believe, in God's grace that can receive that grace if they so will, as he draws them to himself. So four-footed animals. Might be a pig in there, that's something considered unclean. I like my sausage. Bacon, ham. I was like, breakfast would be pretty bad off if I was a Jew and wasn't eating any pigs. Breakfast would be pretty rough. But we see here, or wild beasts, whatever that may be, creeping things, birds of the air, maybe some chicken. And the voice came to him, rise, Peter, kill and eat. Peter was already hungry. Boy, this would have made me, this is how I must know Peter wasn't a Baptist. Lord's telling him, you have a full selection here. Eat, have at it. And he's like, no. I'm like, that's how I know Peter wasn't a Baptist right there. He had a full buffet right there before him. And he's like, nope. But once again, like I said, God had to teach Peter another lesson. God gave him an opportunity. You're hungry, very hungry. Here's all these things. Kill and eat. Verse 14, what did Peter say? But Peter said, not so, Lord, for I've never eaten anything common or unclean. So what do we have here again? And these words are written in red. Rise, Peter, kill and eat. This is Jesus talking. This is God talking. It's written in red here. God himself, perhaps Jesus himself, get you a bite to eat. And Peter's like, no. Once again, Peter receiving a command from the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Jesus telling him, eat something. And he's telling the God of the universe, nope, I'm not going to do it. Imagine telling God no. But sometimes we do that through our words and our actions, whether we realize it or not. But Peter right here, nope, I ain't going to do what you say, God. Not going to do it. Because he's trying to stay with the Old Testament law. Which you remember, thank the Lord, we're not under that anymore. Jesus fulfilled the Old Testament in that way. We're not under that anymore. He's like, not so, Lord. Nope, I'm not going to listen, Jesus. For I've never eaten anything common or unclean. He was trying to be a good Jew. Common or unclean. But what does it say in 15? And a voice spoke to him again the second time. What God has cleansed, you must not call common. As I said, we'll see more of the picture of this as we go throughout. We'll see the fuller picture. Because as I said, the Jews followed these laws. Gentiles did not. And so we see here, God's going to use it. We'll see the fuller story later, but we get a little picture here that God's using a picture of something Peter would understand. The Old Testament dietary laws. He used that to show Peter that, hey, guess what? Cornelius, even though he's a Gentile, he's not viewed less than. He's not unclean. He's not outside of my reach for grace because he's a Gentile. And like I said, we don't get all of that from this section. As I said, you get the answer when you read ahead. And as we go through chapter 10, we'll find more out about that as we go throughout the chapter. But as of right now, God's using this example of this, and Peter's like, not going to listen. What God has cleansed, you must not call common. You know, and that's beautiful to say, because from a spiritual perspective, we were all unclean at one time, spiritually dead. I once was lost, but now I'm found. We were all spiritually unclean. Oh, my sin was as scarlet. Thank the Lord, He made it white as snow. So, yes, maybe we were unclean at one time, but if you've repented of your sins, you've been saved by that grace, you have been made clean by God. No longer to be called common or unclean, but you are cleaned by God, cleansed by Him yourself. There's power in the blood. Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Power, wonder-working power, precious blood of the Lamb. And we'll see that picture as we go on. But right here, he's using this picture of the dietary laws. As I said, there was a little of everything. The four-footed beasts, creeping things, wild beasts, birds of the air, little of everything. None left out here. What God has cleansed, you must not call common. Amazing thing for us to remember right here. Steeped in Jewish tradition and filled with ceremonial biases, Peter was convinced of his view on the Gentiles were correct. He needed a three-part heavenly vision from God to change his mind. And we'll see that as we go along. One of the most basic and practical lessons from this encounter is that when God speaks, we must not challenge what He says. Because notice how it said here, this was done 3 times. You know, I read that today and I'm like, oh my goodness. I started having flashbacks. We went through the book of John, you know. What happened? The number 3 with Peter has some significant meaning because what else happened with Peter? Didn't Jesus say, you're going to deny me 3 times? And Peter's like, no, once again, no, I'm not going to do that. I will die with you. I'm not going to do that. And what happened? Cock-a-doodle-doo. He done denied him 3 times and wept bitterly. But what happened at the end of John? I remember I live streamed this one in the office because we weren't meeting in person, but we covered it too in the end of John. What happened at the end of John? Jesus come to Peter specifically, and what did He tell him? 3 times. Go and feed my sheep. And he's like, do you love me? He asked Peter, do you love me? Well, of course I do, Lord. Go feed my sheep. He asked him a second time, do you love me? Yes. Tend to my sheep. And then the third time, and you don't see this in the English language, but in the Greek, they use different words for love. Like, there's agape love, that's unconditional love. Then there's the word phileo love. That refers to love of friendship. And we know that in our society, too. The way you love a friend ain't the same way you would love your wife, or a pet, or a sibling, or things like that. We know there's different types of love, even in our society, even though we just use one word of love, but we know there's different types. But you see that in the Greek there, Jesus went from, do you love me, or unconditionally, to the very last one, are you even my friend, Peter? And what was it? The third time, Peter was grieved in himself, maybe having some flashbacks or memories himself. He's like, you know, Lord, that I love you. And he was grieved when he asked him the third time. So Peter has some history with the number 3. He's like, nope, I'll never deny you 3 times. Well, he did it. Jesus went back to him and reminded him, like, do you love me? Are you even my friend? 3 times, and it got to Peter. And what do we have here again in Acts chapter 10? This was done 3 times. Looks a little familiar. It doesn't list all 3, but we see here. But Peter said, "Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything uncommon." "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." What did Peter say? "Nope, never eat anything uncommon or clean." And God spoke to him again. "What God has cleansed, you must not call common." This was done 3 times. So Peter perhaps has some more flashbacks. Third time is the charm with Peter. This was done 3 times. So Peter went round and round. "Nope, not going to eat it. Nope, no, what I've made clean, don't call common, don't call unclean." This was done 3 times. And then it ends with, "and the object was taken up into heaven." Now, we'll see the answer in the next section later. We won't get into it tonight, but the next section is 17 through 23. And we'll see as we go through that, Peter got the answer. He finally obeyed after it had to be done once again 3 times. So don't feel bad if you don't get it the first time either. Or obey on the first time either. Peter here, it took 3 times with him a good bit. And I bet number 3, it perhaps started to click with him again. Some flashbacks. "Well, I denied him 3 times. He asked me if I loved him 3 times, and now here he goes again. What God has cleansed, you must not call common." This was done 3 times as well. And the object was taken up into heaven. It doesn't look like there was going to be a 4th time. It was done 3. 3 strikes you out. 3 times, and then that was the end of it. Peter getting the message. But so, may we learn from this here to maybe learn the first time. I know we don't always learn the first time. We see here Peter, he did it over and over again. Thank the Lord he finally come around. Because this is the spread of the gospel to the Gentiles. So maybe learn from Peter's example. Let's try to get it the first time, if we can. 3rd time don't have to be the charm if the first one is. And let's also be thankful for God's saving grace. That's not just for the Jews, not just for a certain group of people, but for man, woman, boy or girl, Gentile, Jew, red, yellow, black, and white. They are precious in His sight. Let's be thankful for that amazing saving grace today. Amen? All right. So with that, would you stand and bow for invitation? That's good there, Brother Terry. Every head bowed, every eye closed, just in the